Hello students, I'm coming to you with the next video lecture on Rubin and Babbie chapter 14. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are still in unit 4, which is related to designs for evaluating programs in practice. We have already covered chapters 11, 12, and 13, and now we are moving into chapter 14, which is related to program evaluation. We are still in phase 3 of the social work research process, which is related to choosing a research design and data collection methods. We're also continuing to explore this idea of group versus individual research designs, and we have already discussed the fact that single case designs are most appropriate for individual clients in comparison to experimental and quasi-experimental designs, which are most appropriate for groups of clients. And what we will learn in this video today is that program evaluation designs are appropriate for both individual clients as well as groups of clients, in that we can draw on all of the various different types of research designs and methods in order to evaluate a single program. I also thought it was appropriate to discuss this idea of effectiveness in experimental research versus program evaluation research. So when it comes to experimental research, specifically experimental, quasi-experimental, or single case designs, this whole idea of effectiveness gets at the extent to which an intervention program is effective, and we want to understand this for the purposes of promoting optimal client outcomes. And by comparison, in program evaluation research, we also want to understand this idea of effectiveness, but we want to understand it for the purposes of ensuring proper use of societal resources. So this whole idea of effectiveness is appropriate across all of these different types of designs, but the reason why effectiveness is appropriate or emphasized differs based on the design itself. We're also continuing to explore the relationship between research design, inference, and causal inference. So we already know that these three research designs here, experimental, quasi-experimental, as well as single case designs, are appropriate for drawing causal inferences. And so now we're adding to our understanding the idea that program evaluation research is appropriate for either drawing basic causal inferences or basic correlational inferences or causal inferences. Simply because, as I just mentioned, we can draw on a number of research designs and methods in order to evaluate a single program. So in terms of this idea of program evaluation uses many different research techniques, as I just mentioned, to study the interworkings of programs and practices. And also, as I just mentioned, program evaluation efforts can involve some combination of surveys, focus groups, interviews, observations, administrative data, as well as experiments. Program evaluation is intended to serve as a tool for monitoring and improving programs. So in terms of why evaluate programs, it really, as I alluded to earlier, has to do with this idea of accountability that really came to be during the accountability era. And so specifically, it has to do with the demand for programs to be more accountable to the public and to show whether they are really delivering what they have promised. And underlying the need to evaluate programs is this belief that scarce funds should not be wasted on ineffectual programs that don't really help their intended target population. Also underlying this need to evaluate programs is the idea that what gets measured gets done. It's also the idea that if you don't measure results, you can't tell success from failure. So how do we know that we have arrived at a point of success? Well, program evaluation helps us to determine that. Also underlying the need to evaluate programs is the idea that if you can't recognize failure, you can't correct it. And if you can't demonstrate results, if you can demonstrate results, you can win public support. Program evaluation, just like all of the other designs that we've discussed, is also linked to evidence-based practice, particularly its emphasis on having practice decisions be informed by research. And this is consistent with concerns about accountability and effectiveness. So far, the designs that we have discussed have really been about looking at the effectiveness of an intervention based on direct individual practice with clients. But now, program evaluation, in this discussion of program evaluation, we're moving more toward the macro level of things and looking at the application of research in practice on a macro level. So program evaluation is really looking at the inner workings of a program, and that which exists on a macro level. But regardless of whether we're talking about individual clients that we work with in a more direct manner, we can also apply evidence-based practice to program evaluation that we do on more of a macro or programmatic level as well. So the three main types of program evaluation that I would like to discuss here are needs assessment, formative or process evaluation, and summative or outcome evaluation. So one of the earliest decisions that has to be made in the process of planning an evaluation is pertaining to the purpose and the evaluation focus. So that's the first thing, one of the first things rather, that we have to decide on is what is the purpose of our evaluation and what will the focus of our evaluation be. And so your text talks about three broad purposes for program evaluation. And we can utilize one or more of these purposes. So there are times in which our evaluation may seek to embark upon more than one purpose. Okay, so that's totally allowed and permissible. But again, it's important to understand what the focus is, even if it has more than one focal point within any given evaluation study. So the first type of evaluation relates to obtaining information needed in program planning and development. And we refer to this type of evaluation as a needs assessment. And this kind of evaluation typically happens, as the description suggests, in the very beginning stages of a program as we're planning and developing the particular program that we're seeking to implement, which makes sense, right? It's very difficult to implement a program if we don't first have an understanding of what the needs of the community or target population are. So in the program planning and development phase, it's often necessary to begin by conducting a needs assessment. The second type of program evaluation involves assessing problems and how programs are being implemented, and this is referred to as a process evaluation. So process evaluations, as I alluded to earlier, really get at the inner workings and the processes of how a program is being carried out. And this is very, very important and worthwhile endeavor simply because oftentimes the success of our program is really contingent on whether we have really worked out the kinks and the various shortcomings that exist within the inner workings of that program. And so oftentimes it may look as though we're not achieving success or we're not being effective in our delivery of a program. It may appear to be that way, but oftentimes what's happening is there's something going on within the process of service delivery that we need to better understand in order to improve our outcomes. So process evaluations are very, very useful and important. And then the third type of evaluation is intended to assess the ultimate success of a program, and this is referred to as an outcome evaluation. So this kind of evaluation really gets at the bottom line in terms of whether the program is working, whether it's achieving its goals and objectives, whether it is effective or not. This is what this kind of evaluation gets at. So let's look more deeply into each type of assessment. or sorry, each type of evaluation. So in terms of needs assessments involve numerous techniques for collecting data for program planning purposes, as I just mentioned. Needs assessments are referred to as evaluation for program planning. And your text talks about 5 techniques for conducting a needs assessment, and they include key informants approach, a community form approach, a rates under treatment approach, a social indicators approach, and a surveys of communities or target group approach. So in terms of the key informants approach, this involves using questionnaires or interviews to obtain expert opinions from individuals who are presumed to have special knowledge about the target population's problems and needs, as well as any gaps in service delivery to that population. So these are individuals who have a special knowledge base that we need in order to understand our target population's problems and needs. And then the community forum approach is really similar to a town hall kind of forum approach. And this involves holding a meeting in which concerned members of the community can freely express their views and needs as they see them from their perspective. The rates under treatment approach and the social indicators approach are very similar in that they both rely on statistics, but the source of those statistics are slightly different. So in the rates under treatment approach, it attempts to estimate need for a service on the basis of the number and characteristics of clients who already use the service. So if you were in the process of developing a new program, you might find a program that already exists within the community that serves a similar target population that you are seeking to serve, and you might seek to collect some data from those clients in order to get a sense of what the needs might be from clients who already use the kind of service that you are seeking to provide. And so the type of statistics yielded within this approach is called treatment statistics. And by contrast, in the social indicators approach, this approach attempts to estimate need by making use of existing statistics. This approach does not examine treatment statistics, it examines aggregated statistics that reflect the conditions of an entire population. So these statistics are referred to as general population statistics. And so we might get these kinds of statistics from like credible state level or federal level agencies such as the CDC, the National Institutes of Health, the American Psychological Association, and different agencies and organizations that produce reliable statistics that help us to gauge the kind of need that we're seeking to fill within the community that we are targeting. And then finally, the survey of community or target group approach is the most direct way to assess the needs of a target population. Every other approach that I've discussed thus far has involved some kind of secondary source of data, whether it be key informants, whether it be the treatment rates under treatment approach or the social indicator approach. None of those approaches involve directly assessing the needs of the target population. Versus in this approach, this is a direct way where we go straight to the source in order to assess whatever the needs of the population might be. And so within this approach, it applies the principles and techniques of sampling and survey research. And specifically, what we'll learn about in the next video lecture is that typically when we are employing a survey, surveys are very useful for gathering information from large groups of individuals. And so oftentimes when the group is large, very large, it can be impractical to survey everyone that makes up the target group. So it might involve sampling a group of individuals from the target group that we're seeking to study. In some instances, it might be feasible to undertake a census where we survey the entire group, every single individual that makes up the group. But then in the case that doing so is not feasible, then we have the option of sampling as well. But either way, This particular approach, again, the most important thing to take away or understand here is that this is the most direct approach of assessing the needs of a target group. And in this approach, data collection could involve surveys, and it could also involve qualitative interviews or focus groups as well. In terms of process evaluations, these evaluations are performed to examine various aspects of an ongoing program in order to make changes or improvements as the program is being implemented. That's a very key part of this sentence, is that process evaluations are ongoing. They happen throughout the course of a program being implemented so that we can understand the inner workings and we can understand where changes need to be made so that we can have ultimate success. Process evaluations involve making attempts to document exactly what is transpiring or happening in a program and the extent to which the program is being implemented as designed. And this goes back to the idea of fidelity that we talked about within experimental and quasi-experimental designs. Is we always want to be sure that the program is functioning or operating in the way that we've intended. And so process evaluations help us to better determine and understand that. Process evaluations also tend to be more qualitative in nature, and this doesn't mean that we can't draw on quantitative methods as well. But when we think about process evaluations and what they allow us to do in terms of studying the inner workings of a program, we always have to think about what approach is going to be best to help us to ask the questions and get the answers that we desire. And so when we think about processes and inner workings of programs, well, it's not impossible to glean information about that from more of a quantitative method, but qualitative methods yield themselves much better to understanding processes. And so the approach to process evaluations tend to be more qualitative, but can also be quantitative in nature as well. In terms of outcome evaluations are conducted for the purposes of documenting the results or ultimate success of a program. Specific goals of a program are identified, and the degree to which those goals were accomplished is assessed and documented. Results convey a sense of finality in terms of whether a program is successful or not, and whether a program may or may not survive. So your text talks about how evaluation overall can be a very political process, in a very controversial process, but particularly when it comes to outcome evaluation, simply because they do convey a sense of finality, and they do suggest the extent to which a program is working or not. And for a program that relies heavily on external funding, well, this might possibly put the program in jeopardy. So for those reasons, oftentimes outcome evaluations are a scary thing for a lot of agencies. And so one of the things that your text talks about is really understanding sort of who wants the evaluation, who doesn't want the evaluation, and things of that nature, because the reality is there are folks within agency context that prefer that their programs not be evaluated for a number of reasons. And so this is just something to think about, particularly as it relates to outcome evaluations specifically. And then there are other types of evaluations that are discussed in your text you don't necessarily need to understand these in detail. I only want you to understand the three that I've just discussed, but I also want you to be aware that there are other types that are pointed out in your text. One is the goal attainment model of evaluation, which really gets at the extent to which a program is achieving its goals. And it's very similar to an outcome evaluation, but it really just is very specific to goal attainment. And then the other two are referred to as efficiency models of evaluation, and they both get at this issue of cost and the extent to which a program is being cost efficient in their endeavors. And so the first one is really just focuses on cost effectiveness alone. And the second one looks at costs, and it also weighs those costs with benefits as well. Hence the name cost benefit analysis. And then in terms of which type of program is most appropriate and when, this visual here I felt was very helpful because it kind of gives you an idea of the life cycle of a program and at what point each type of program evaluation is most appropriate. So needs assessments are typically implemented before a program begins, in terms of understanding what the need is prior to actually implementing a program. And then a process or implementation evaluation is typically done with a newer program, and this is more formative in nature, sort of when a program is in its infancy and the agency staff or personnel are trying to understand the inner workings or processes of the program. And as programs move more toward a state of maturity, that's when we get more into the evaluations that are more summative in nature. And then here's just a chart to help you understand and categorize each of the types of evaluations that I've just discussed and where they fall in terms of whether they're more formative in nature or more summative in nature. In terms of the politics of program evaluation, I've kind of alluded to this already, but I'll go more in detail here simply because I always like to present you with the realities that you will face in the field in your attempts to integrate research into your practice. No matter what type of design you're dealing with, there will always be obstacles, there will always be politics involved. And so I always want you to be aware and sort of equipped and armed with that information. And this should not preclude you or prevent you from conducting research. We're still obligated as social workers to make every attempt we can to integrate research into our practice. But it is also good to be informed about what the potential obstacles are that you might face. And so one of the sort of key things to understand that is unique to program evaluation research is this issue of the utilization of findings. This is one major problem that happens in the field of program evaluation, is that oftentimes programs are evaluated, but the findings and the recommendations that are yielded from those evaluations are not always utilized. And ultimately, we want the findings to be used because those findings are intended to be utilized in order to make improvements in the program for the betterment of clients, for the betterment of communities, families, societies, etc. And so your text touches on 3 reasons why program evaluation findings may not be utilized. And one is that evaluation results may not always be presented in a way that non-researchers can understand. And this is a huge issue, not just with program evaluation, but with any type of research. As I have to admit that as researchers, we don't always do the best job of communicating our results in a way that is accessible to folks that are not researchers. And so this is one major reason that can really prevent utilization of findings. Another reason is that sometimes as evaluators, we can be the bearer of bad news, and what we find may not be in alignment with deeply held beliefs about a program. Oftentimes, agency staff members are very immersed in their programs, they're very invested in their programs, and they have some deeply held beliefs that they hold, whether they discuss those beliefs or not. They're oftentimes there the longer that individuals are working within a particular context. And so oftentimes, no news is good news, and it's easier to continue to function in a realm of business as usual because evaluation results may challenge some of the beliefs that we hold. And so that might prevent individuals from actually utilizing the findings that are yielded from these from evaluation efforts. Some may have vested interest in producing positive results that suggest effectiveness, and anything to the contrary may be ignored. So, in terms of this, kind of goes along with what I just mentioned in terms of individuals having a vested interest in evaluation findings producing positive results. And so, anything to the contrary may also cause individuals to not utilize evaluation results. Anything that is yielded that may suggest that the program is not working, is not beneficial in some way to clients or to agency staff. Either way, we have to keep in mind that individuals functioning within these programs do have vested interests, and they do realize and understand that evaluation results can jeopardize many things for them. And so they do have a vested interest in seeing results turn out to be positive, which is not always the case with evaluation. There are times in which results are not positive, but we still have the obligation to share those results. And then in terms of logistical and administrative options to program evaluation, again, there are many obstacles to conducting this kind of research in an agency context that you should be aware of. One has to do with getting individuals to follow through with the evaluation plan and engage in tasks that are necessary for producing credible results. I like to refer to program evaluation as a team effort. It's really something that cannot be pulled off unless all parties involved are on board. So a logistical concern could be just working through the kinks of getting everyone on the same page about what the plan is and getting individuals to follow through on that plan. Also, unforeseen circumstances may cause program personnel to make programmatic changes that influence the outcome of the evaluation. And this is most likely to happen when the evaluation team is not on site regularly. Oftentimes, funding for a particular evaluation does not always permit having someone from the evaluation team to be on site regularly. And so there are times in which program staff can inadvertently make changes to a program that they don't always realize has an impact on the outcome of an evaluation. If we think about this in a very practical way, as a program staff person, well, you don't walk around every day thinking about an evaluation plan. Like that's the job of the evaluation team, right? And so there might be instances where those that are in a position to make programmatic changes may be faced with dilemmas or situations in which they have to make those changes, and the implications of those changes are not always evident or clear. So that can be an obstacle as well, because certain programmatic changes can really wreak havoc on an evaluation. And then finally, the potential influence of vested interest and political pressures on the integrity and quality of evaluations. Such issues pertain mostly to outcome evaluations rather than process evaluations and needs assessments. So I just alluded to this in that among all the various different types of evaluations that we've discussed, the most controversial one is the ones that are more summative in nature or the more outcome-based evaluations, simply because they do convey a sense of finality and they do speak to the ultimate success of a program. And so the field of program evaluation is a field unto itself, and evaluators are held to particular standards that I will discuss toward the end of this lecture. But when we're dealing with individuals within an agency context that have vested interests, there can be political pressures that challenge evaluators in terms of their ability to maintain the sense of integrity and quality of evaluations that, from a professional standpoint, they're expected to. So now I will get at the steps that are required in planning an evaluation and fostering its utilization. So as was just mentioned, there are many obstacles to program evaluation. Also, some program evaluations are completed, but its findings and recommendations are never utilized, as I just mentioned. And to attempt to minimize these problems and foster utilization of evaluation recommendations, it is vital that planning be done carefully and thoroughly. And so the way in which I like to talk about this idea of planning and evaluations and fostering the use of evaluations is through a resource that I was able to find produced by the Pell Institute, and it's called the Evaluation Toolkit. And I like to utilize this resource because it helps to connect the dots on how to go about planning an evaluation sort of in a step-by-step kind of way. And it helps to connect the dots to all of this in a way that your text doesn't. And so all of the information that I'll present in this section is drawn from or pulled from your text, but the way in which I organize it is based on the framework provided within this toolkit. And this is the link to the toolkit if you would like to reference it at any point in time. So as I showed on the last slide, the toolkit goes through 4 steps in the evaluation process, but the only one that I will go through in this lecture is just step 1, which is related to developing an evaluation plan. So the components of the plan involve selecting an evaluator, engaging stakeholders, creating a logic model, and finally developing evaluation questions. So in terms of selecting an evaluator, one of the first things you want to think about is whether it will be an internal versus external evaluator. And so internal or in-house evaluators are evaluators that work for the agency being evaluated, such as a program staff member. And an external evaluator is an evaluator that works for an external agency, such as a consulting firm or a university. So for example, even myself, I've been involved in numerous evaluation projects as an external evaluator because university faculty are often called upon in order to assist community agencies with evaluating their programs. And so there are many pros and cons to each type of evaluator. And so I'll just go through some of these just to give you an idea, and then you can follow up and read this on your own at another time. But in terms of internal evaluators, they tend to be cheaper. They tend to not require collaboration. Because they're on the inside, they tend to be more trusted by agency staff and stakeholders, and hence they're more likely to have better cooperation and feedback from them. And then on the other hand, in terms of cons, they tend to lack expertise in program evaluation. They may not necessarily have a very strong research base that's necessary for designing the most rigorous program evaluation possible. And then also they may lack out of the box thinking just because they're on the inside. And so it's difficult to really think outside of the box when you're very immersed within an agency context. And then on the other hand, external evaluators, if we're dealing with an external evaluator, they're considered to be experts in the field of program evaluation, which is definitely a plus. And then they're also perceived to be more objective due to being outside of the agency, but your text also talks about how we have to be careful to not assume that external evaluators will be more objective than internal evaluators because they also have their own biases as well. External evaluators are thought of as having the tendency to have more of an out-of-the-box perspective, simply because they're on the outside of the agency. But on the con side of things, they tend to be more expensive. They also require more collaboration. They also may have limited access to program evaluation and personnel, simply because they're on the outside, so they may not have as much trust from agency staff and stakeholders. And then again, as I just mentioned, your text talks about how they may not always be objective in that they may have their own vested interests as well in terms of producing certain findings from an evaluation, because many times external evaluators are experts in the field and this is their bread and butter. This is what they do for a living. They conduct program evaluations. And so ideally, they want to continue to secure contracts. And so oftentimes they want to be in the good graces of those that are paying them in order to secure future contracts. So external evaluators, while they are thought to be more objective, also carry their own biases as well. And then in terms of engaging stakeholders, stakeholders are people who have an interest in the program. It is essential that stakeholders be involved in a meaningful way early on in the planning of the evaluation and not after the research design has already been implemented. So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, the program evaluation process really is an all hands on deck kind of endeavor. And so it's very important to engage stakeholders from the beginning so that they feel invested in the process, and in doing so, it is more likely to promote their full support and involvement in the process. In addition, involving them can increase the chances that the evaluation will focus on something that they deem as relevant. And again, as I just mentioned, it might foster their support and cooperation, particularly during the data collection process. And then also it might promote the eventual utilization of findings and recommendations, because as I mentioned, ultimately we want the findings and recommendations to be utilized. And so having individuals on board can help us to promote the use of the findings that are yielded from an evaluation. And then here are three key questions that your text refers to that I really like in terms of summing all of this up, is that we want to understand who wants the evaluation, why they want it, and who doesn't want it. And this is the reality. As we attempt to conduct program evaluation research in an agency context, there will be individuals who don't want the program to be evaluated for their own respective reasons. And so the more we can be informed and the more we can be strategic in our thinking and the more information we can gather at the onset of the evaluation, just so that we know what we're walking into, the better off we'll be. And so potential key stakeholders could be program funders, personnel or staff, service recipients and their families, board members, neighborhood residents, and tax-paying citizens. And this is a tool that I like to utilize that kind of helps to strategize about who our promoters are, who our resistors are, and such. It just really gives us a very clear picture. And this is a tool that can be utilized to sort of brainstorm within an agency context about stakeholders. And so these are descriptions of each that you can read on your own, but it provides an understanding of all of the terms that we see in the power interest grid in terms of promoters, defenders, latents, and apathetics. So this is something that you can look at in your own time. But again, it's a very useful tool in terms of brainstorming and strategizing about stakeholders. And then also creating a logic model. So in terms of what a logic model is, it is a graphic portrayal that depicts the essential components or activities of a program and shows how these components are linked to program objectives and outcomes. They can be very useful tools in a number of ways. One is that it can help program planners to conceptualize, develop, and implement new programs. It can also help program administrators to manage their program and keep it from deviating too far from its intended purpose. And finally, it can help evaluators to determine if a program is being implemented as intended and assess the overall success of a program. Some federal and private funding sources now require grant applications to include a logic model. So this is a very useful skill to have. Someday you might find yourself needing to apply for a grant or contribute to a grant application that's being produced by your respective agency. And so having the skills and knowledge of logic models can be very helpful. Good logic models are seen as enhancing the likelihood that a program will be managed well, implemented properly, and evaluated appropriately. There's no one way to construct a logic model, and there are also several different types of logic models. So we'll look at the various different types of logic models momentarily. So here are the basic components of any logic model. So the basic components in terms of program inputs, we have our resources that go into our program, and then we also have our activities and interventions that we employ in our program. And then in terms of program goals, we have our outputs, our outcomes, and our impacts. And this is a useful visual that is provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and it kind of helps to understand the logic underlying a logic model. And so basically, the idea here is that there are certain resources that are needed to operate your program. And then if you have access to those resources, then you can use them to accomplish your planned activities or interventions. And then in turn, if you accomplish your planned activities, then you will hopefully deliver the amount of product and or service that you intended. And again, in turn, if you wish to accomplish your if you accomplish your planned activities to the extent that you intended, then your participants will benefit in certain ways. And if these benefits to participants are achieved, then certain changes in organizations, communities, or systems might be expected to occur. So this helps to understand how all of the various different parts of a logic model fit together. Here's an example of a basic logic model. If we were running a program that was designed to address the problem of teen repeat pregnancies. So our resources or inputs might be funding, training, building space, and transportation. Our activities might be counseling, psychoeducational services, and mentoring. And then from those activities, our outputs might be 10 counseling sessions, 5 hours per week of psychoeducational services, 2 hours per week of mentoring. And then ultimately, our outcomes might be that teen mothers will reduce repeat pregnancies by 50% within 1 year. And notice that this goal is very specific, right? So it gives the percentage of how much of a reduction we expect and within what time frame. So this is what we call a SMART goal, okay? And then in terms of long-term impacts, well, long-term impacts really get at ultimately how will this program influence larger systems or larger communities. And so in terms of long-term impacts, hypothetically, we might expect that teen repeat pregnancies will be reduced, for example, in LA County by 10% within 5 years. So that was the basic logic model. And your text gets at two of the most common types of logic models. One is a theory-based logic model, and the other is an outcome approach logic model. And within a theory-based logic model, just as the title suggests, it emphasizes the underlying assumptions of a theory and how those underlying assumptions drive the program components and the development of a program. So just like a research study can employ a theoretical framework and can have sort of an underlying theory driving the research design and findings, such is the same for a program as well. A program, underlying a program can also be a particular theory that's driving the way in which that program is developed and the various components that are included in that program. And then an outcomes approach logic model is very similar to the logic model that I just reviewed, and it really emphasizes program outcomes. So in terms of a theory-based logic model, as you can see here, it starts out with the theoretical assumptions that underlie the program, and then it goes into program resources, program activities, program outputs, program outcomes, and program impact. And then here in this, this is just a visual from your text. It doesn't have all the components that should be included in a logic model, but the main thing I want to point out here is that the first thing that you see in the logic model is the theoretical principles or assumptions that underlie this particular program. And in this case, this is a program that's used in a federally funded program for a federally funded homeless prevention program. And so underlying the development of this program is a theoretical basis. And so this is outlined here in this first block. And then in an outcomes approach logic model, as you can see, there is no theoretical foundation. So similar to research studies that are atheoretical in nature and don't necessarily include a theoretical foundation, the same is true for a logic model where it does not start out with an explanation of theoretical foundations. It goes right into program resources, activities, output, outcomes, and impact. And here's an example from your text, a visual example of this that you can see here and refer back to as well. And I just wanted to put in a plug here as well for the extra credit for the logic model training, which is worth 5 points. This will be a good time to complete it, given that we have now discussed logic models in greater detail in this lecture. In terms of the development of evaluation questions, so essentially, or generally with a summative evaluation, we're really getting at the question of, does the program work? In terms of the bottom line, is the program working? And then generally speaking, in a formative evaluation, the underlying question is, how does it work? In what respect, for whom, and under what circumstances? So these are sort of the broad evaluations questions that are gotten at in a summative versus a formative evaluation. And in terms of a process evaluation, we know that it is related to the inner workings of a program. And so some of the questions we might ask with regard to a process evaluation might be, are the program goals and objectives being met? If so, how? If not, why? If not, why not? Is the target population being reached as intended? Is the target population adequately involved in activities, and so on and so forth. And your text on page 332 also gives some additional questions to consider with regard to process evaluations as well. In terms of summative evaluation, some of the questions we might think about is, did the program produce the intended outcomes in the short, medium, and long term? For whom has the program been effective, in what ways and under what circumstances? What were the particular features of the program and context that made the most difference? So these are some of the questions that we might ask if we are conducting a summative or outcome program evaluation. But overall, in this step, we want to become very clear on what our evaluation questions are. And then these are the other steps that are involved in the process as well that I mentioned are covered in this toolkit. So if at any point in time you feel you find yourself needing to reference a resource to help walk you through the program evaluation process, again, this is a very useful resource. And so the other steps that the toolkit takes you through is the collection of data, the analysis of data, and then also the process of communicating the results and making improvements. In terms of quantitative and qualitative methods in program evaluation, as I mentioned, this particular design is very flexible and allows for the use of a number of methods and designs in order to evaluate a single program. So I just wanted to kind of lay this out in a table format for you so that you can see it visually. And this is not exhaustive. This is just hypothetical. There are so many ways to mix and match these methods and designs, but these are just some examples here that are broken down by the type of evaluation that you are seeking to produce. And then here's our case study that we've been drawing on, and we'll continue to draw on this same case study here as we talk about program evaluation. And so what I've done is I've developed a evaluation plan for our Keys to Competence in Parenting program. And so in terms of selecting an evaluator, I have chosen to go with an external evaluator from a consulting firm that specializes in the evaluation of fatherhood programs. And the reason why I emphasize this specialization in fatherhood programs is that I've learned and I've been in situations where individuals have attempted to evaluate fatherhood programs, but they haven't necessarily had a very good knowledge base of the inner workings of these kinds of programs because they're very unique in nature. And so from my experiences, I've learned that if at all possible, it's best to have someone serve as the evaluator that has a knowledge base of fatherhood research and even more specifically fatherhood programs. And I've also identified key stakeholders in terms of fathers themselves, fatherhood program staff, board members, community members, and program staff. And then I will walk you through here momentarily a logic model that I've created for the Keys to Competence in Parenting program. But in terms of evaluation questions, the first question that I would ask here hypothetically is, did the program produce the intended outcome? Okay, so this is more of an outcome evaluation. And the intended outcome that's in our logic model that I'll show momentarily is that fathers will increase their parenting self-efficacy by 50% within 1 year. Evaluation question number 2 is more of a process question, and that is the program being implemented as intended? Okay. And so to get at my first evaluation question, I might employ an experimental pre-test, post-test control group design with repeated measures of parenting self-efficacy. So I would look at parenting self-efficacy pre and post the intervention that I employ. And then my second, to get at the second question, I might observe program activities in order to answer this question of whether the program is being implemented as intended. So this is essentially how I would go about putting together an evaluation plan for the program that we have been walking through over the past couple of lectures. Here is our logic model that I was just referencing in the last slide. So if we were developing a program for the non-resident fathers that we have been discussing, our problem would be that we would be focusing on would be that of parenting self-efficacy. And our potential resources could be funders, counselors, and mentors. Our activities or interventions could be individual therapy and mentoring, as we've been discussing. And then in this case, our outputs could potentially be 10 counseling sessions and 5 hours per week of mentoring. And then our expected outcome could be that fathers will increase their parenting self-efficacy by 50% within 1 year. In terms of long-term impacts, we might state that non-resident fathers at the West Waco Community Mental Health Center will increase their parenting self-efficacy and improve their parenting skills by 25% within 5 years. And then I wanted to share with you a strengths-based perspective to evaluation, simply because I know that within social work, we always value a strengths-based perspective. And so a strengths-based perspective to evaluation is referred to as appreciative inquiry. And so appreciative inquiry is a way of being and seeing. It is both a worldview and a process for facilitating positive change within human service organizations. And its assumption is that every human system has something that works right. Appreciative inquiry begins by identifying the positive core and connecting to it in a way that heightens energy, sharpens vision, and inspires action for change. So, if we sort of conduct evaluation through the lens of appreciative inquiry, what we're doing is focusing on the strengths of the organization or the agency and the positive core of that agency as a focus for evaluation, rather than focusing on the problems that might be occurring within the agency. So it really shifts from the problems to the organization or agency's positive core. And I won't go too much into detail about that, but I just want you to be aware that this particular form of inquiry exists, and that you may find it useful to you at some point in the future if you are ever called upon to engage in an evaluation of some sort. And in terms of critiquing program evaluation research, how we go about critiquing program evaluation research looks differently than the other designs that we've discussed. In that, as I mentioned before, program evaluation is really a field unto itself, similar and a profession unto itself, just like social work. And so just like we have our own core values and standards and such, the field of program evaluation does as well. And so the standards for program evaluation were developed by the Joint Committee on Standards for Educational Evaluation. And these standards guide evaluators and evaluation users in the pursuit of evaluation quality. And there are 30 standards organized into 5 groups that are recommended as criteria for judging the quality of program evaluation efforts. And this is the website where these evaluation standards can be found. You can get further information from either one of these websites with regard to these standards. And so I didn't put them in detail here simply because I provided the website as something you can refer back to. But there are 5 sets of evaluation standards, as I mentioned, and they fall within these 5 categories. So utility standards, feasibility standards, proprietary standards, accuracy standards, and evaluation accountability standards. But it's very, very important to understand that program evaluators, particularly those that are expert evaluators, do operate by a particular set of standards. And these standards help us to evaluate the quality of program evaluation efforts. Here are some additional program evaluation resources that you might refer back to at some point in time whenever you have the opportunity. But I definitely encourage each of you to look into the profession of program evaluation. If you can get the skill down, it really is a very, very useful and budding and very vibrant profession that may be something that you decide at some point in time that you'd like to take up on the side of clinical practice. If you're able to get the skill down, there are many opportunities out there to contract with various different community agencies as an evaluator. So this is an additional opportunity that sometimes students don't always consider as a viable source of employment beyond the master's degree. So in terms of the exercise for this particular lecture, so in this exercise, you will select a program from your field placement that you'd like to focus your exercise on. And then from there, you will decide on the type of evaluation that you will conduct, whether it will be an outcome or process evaluation. And from there, you can develop an evaluation plan that includes all the components that we've discussed. So, selecting an evaluator, identifying key stakeholders, creating a logic model, developing evaluation questions. And I'd also like for you to consider JCSEE's 30 program evaluation standards in the development of your plan. And think about how your plan or the extent to which your plan addresses those standards. And finally, as always, here's my contact information, and I hope this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next class.